Hello everyone, this is Michel Leviathan Sorbet, and this is a new episode of Wojennik TV. A new episode and a very special episode because I have a special guest today. This guest will be Vangelis Bagiartakis, the designer of Freedom. Hello, Vangelis.
Hello, Michel. Happy to be here.
Glad to have you here also. I'm really thrilled and thank you a lot that you agreed to have this conversation today. So
My
firstly, I'd like to ask you a few questions about your background, about who you are, because most wargamers, most PHALANX fans know that you're the designer of Freedom, a war game released thanks to a successful Kickstarter campaign in 2019, founded in 2019, released in 2020. But maybe some of our viewers are not aware who exactly you are. So if you could please give us some information, what is your background and why did you decide to create board games?
Okay, so my background is I've studied physics. I'm a physicist, but I never worked on physics. I actually was working in an IT company at some point as an analyst, and as a kid, I used to play a lot of games, mostly video games, but anything would catch my attention. So when I got into college, I was allowed into Magic the Gathering, playing with a group over there. Spending almost all of my time on it. But at some point, the brother of one of my friends who were playing Magic with, he got a board game, one of those modern board games. It was actually Doom, the board game by Fantasy Flight Games, and so initially it seemed very strange to me. I said, okay, why would I sit to play Doom as a board game? I mean, you can play the video game. But okay, I sat down and we played it, and we got hooked. We liked it a lot, and we started, meeting very often and playing it. And we also started trying other board games as well. And basically, that was how I got into board gaming. Now, fast forward a few years later, I finished college. I'm working. I'm still playing board games, and I have started having ideas of my own. So I decided to put them into paper and make a prototype of a game I had in mind. And that game was called Souvlaki Wars. It was a game about you were controlling restaurant owners who were serving souvlaki, very famous Greek fast food, kebab, basically in a special bread, and it's very common here in Greece. So I made a game around that, and there was around that time, while I was play testing and trying the game, there was a game design contest held here in Athens, and it was actually the first of its kind, organized by some members of the board gaming community. So I decided to join with what I had made, Souvlaki Wars, and it turned out the game went really well, and it got first place in this contest. So I said, okay, I may have something good here. So I pitched the idea to one of the publishers here in Greece, one of the biggest board game publishers, and they liked it, and they decided to publish it. And so that was how my first game became a reality. And obviously, this encouraged me to try other ideas I had as well, to work more on games. So I continued to do so. And after a point, I had a big dilemma to face. On one hand, I loved game design. I had already designed a few games by that time, like Among the Stars, for example. But the problem was that I didn't have a lot of free time due to family obligations. I was married. I had three children at that point. So I didn't have free time to work on game design. All of the morning I was in my day job. The rest of the day I was with my family. By the time we put the kids to bed, I was dead tired. I didn't have the strength to do anything. But the fact that I couldn't work on game design, it was killing me because I really, really loved it. So I took advantage of of an opportunity that came up, and I decided to leave my day job and work full time on game design. So on 2014, I did this. I quit my day job, and since then I work full time on game design.
So quite a courageous decision, because not when thinking of designing board games, we do not instantly think of people who make a lot of money, or very rich or very famous people. Of course, we have some very famous designers, but being a full-time designer is a big thing. I suppose it's quite a difficult decision to make.
Yes, it is difficult. I was lucky because, as I said, took I grabbed an opportunity that appeared, which was RTPI Games, the publisher of Among the Stars, suggested that I go work for them. So that was my ticket, let's say, out of my previous job, which was a good job with better salary, but it was not something that I loved. And the other was something that I was very passionate about. And so I decided to make the transition. And since then, I've been designing games or working on other people's games. This is what I have been doing for a living.
So actually, you're just doing what you have to do. So this is a good way to go. You mentioned Magic the Gathering. I'll return to this only for a few moments, because actually I also played Magic the Gathering for a long time. And I'm curious to know how long did you play, and are you still playing? Are you still collecting Magic the Gathering cards, or is it something of the past?
So I was heavy into Magic the Gathering for between, let's say, 2000 and 2005. That's where I was playing the most.
Okay.
Since then, I've gone, up and down. There was a period during which I didn't follow the game at all for I don't know how many years, until 2012, 2013, something like that. At some point, I started, casually, playing in pre-release tournaments again every now and then, just to, familiarize myself a bit with the game. And since then, that was what I mostly did. I would play every now and then in a pre-release tournament. At some point, I played a little bit on Magic Arena, but not something very heavy, because I don't have so much time to dedicate to Magic the Gathering. There is a famous saying that for Magic the Gathering you need three things, which is time, people, and money. And almost whenever you look at your life, you have two out of those three. It's very rare to have all three of them. So when I was younger, okay, I had a lot of time, I had people, but being a student, okay, you didn't have that much money. When you grow up and you have your own job, okay, you can afford buying, a little bit more, but you have other obligations, so you don't have as much time, or it's harder to find people to play with. So you know probably how it goes. However, with Magic the Gathering, what I never stopped doing was following its design, reading articles about its design. From Mark Rosewater, the head designer of Magic, is one of my favorite designers, and I believe I have learned a lot through his articles and through the content that he puts online. And actually, what really helped me in my first design on was that I had been reading, even when I had no idea I would be working as a game designer in the future. I always found it very fascinating to read about the design of Magic, to learn the
Mhm.
behind the scenes stuff. Okay, how did they come up with this mechanic or with this card? So what did they change? What worked? What didn't work? I remember reading about these things, and they were very interesting to me, even though I had no intention at that point of ever doing something similar of my own. So when I started designing my first game, all of these things that I had read came back into my mind, and I was
Mhm.
thinking, oh, all right. Remember then you had read this, okay? So I should avoid that, or I should try to adjust my design so that it fits this. And so I tried, even subconsciously, I kept everything that I had read, and it came out through my game. So I still
Mhm.
read articles on Magic the Gathering design every now and then, and it has been very helpful for me.
Mhm. So actually, everything is connected from a passion, from a game which was meant to be a hobby. You finally started designing games and using all the knowledge that you acquired there. You mentioned Souvlaki Wars, which had the name Wars in the title, but it's not a war game. Freedom is a war game. So why did you decide finally to focus on such an interesting topic, which is the one of the most important battles fought during the Greek War of Independence?
Okay, so as you said, you're right. I I'm not a war gamer. I mean, in the strict sense, I'm not heavy on war games. Although I'm happy to play anything. Uh,
Hmm.
I don't mind. I can play whatever game you throw at me. I'm willing to play it. And uh, so games like Twilight Struggle or Here I Stand, they're part of my collection. Although obviously I don't play them as often as I'd like. Uh, but one thing that I like to do is explore different genres as a designer. You see, some
Hmm.
people say, okay, I'm a heavy hero designer, or I design dexterity games, or I design family games mostly. I like to explore all of these things. I like to try out
Hmm.
different ideas. So I'm willing to work on a heavy war game, and the next day I can try a silly dexterity game for kids. So I'm all over the place, but no matter what I work on, I always try to give it my best and create something that the people who enjoy these types of games will also enjoy it. I don't want to, someone to see my design and say, okay, what's this? It doesn't belong here. So when I started work on Freedom, one game that I really enjoyed, and it was actually, let's say, mechanically the inspiration was 1960, The Making of a President, which
Hmm.
thematically is not a war game, but
Hmm.
in a sense, you can call it a war game. Instead of units, you have votes.
Hmm. Sure.
So I really liked this the the card-driven engine that it has, where you have these cards full of events. You learn a lot of things through these cards, and when it's your turn, you can either play the card for what it says or use its points for another action. So uh, you have the option to do whatever you want because you can use them as for their action points to do anything that you plan on doing to follow your specific strategy. But at the same time, they can be really helpful at times, and they also help tell a story while you play. You get to
Hmm.
relive all those events. So, if how freedom came to be back in 2011, 10 years ago, exactly 10 years ago, it was March, and we were celebrating our Independence Day, 25th of March. And
Hmm.
so I was with my family in an event about that day, and we were watching a child's play. There were children that were acting a theatrical play, and the story was about Messolonghi. Okay,
Hmm.
so it was a story that it was on. it took place during the siege, and it contained references to most of the important events there. And there was, near the end of the play, there was a mention about one very famous Greek hero, Karaiskakis, who is one of the most well-known heroes of our war. He was about to go and help in Messolonghi during the final days, but he suddenly fell ill and he couldn't make it. And while they were counting on his help, in the end he didn't manage to go there. So suddenly, when I heard this, in my mind it struck me as it seemed like somebody just played an event card. Like he said, okay, Karaiskakis falls ill, so you play this card and you change your opponent's plans. So I realized at that point that this whole setting could very easily make a game. You had two very distinct parties. There are a lot of interesting things going on. It was very close who would win in the end. It already had lasted a year, and both parties it was very difficult for them to keep on, both the besiegers and the people within the city. So I realized that there was a game there waiting to happen, and this game would allow this story, which is a great story, very, very interesting. It would allow it to be told to other people as well. So I wanted to get this chance to tell the story, and I couldn't, I couldn't draw. I'm not a painter. I'm not a singer. I cannot write a song about it or write a book or something. But what I could do, or I thought I could do at that time, was okay. I can design a game around this event. So what I did was I got in touch with the people who had written the play and who had studied a lot about the actual history. So got in touch and told him my idea, and he agreed to help me. And so we started exchanging some ideas in the beginning, but usually you know how it is with somebody when you say, okay, let's do this, yes, and then you end up not speaking to each other for like half a year or even more. It was something like that with us. We would meet every year, every few months, and we would say to each other, hey, we need to do this. Yes, we need to do it. And we would leave it at that. So at some point, it was 2014, he reached out to me and he said, look, I just finished all of my studies. I'm about to start looking for a job. This is a great window that we have here where I have time to work on this. Otherwise, it will be very difficult for me. So if we don't do it now, we're never going to do it. So I agreed, and we started working on the game. He helped by providing the historical background, and I would translate everything into mechanics and try to create the game. And obviously there were a lot of back and forths, like, okay, so this is what happened there. How do we represent this? In the beginning, we were wondering, okay, what kind of map are we going to make? Will it have hexagons? Will it have what's the landscape? What are we going to do? And we actually used some maps that we found in very old military magazines, like beginning of 20th century issues. They had a map of Messolonghi, and this map actually showed the position of the Ottoman forces when they were first deployed in front of the city. And I noticed that they were like in a circular pattern, semi-circular pattern. So I said, okay, I'll try to make it like this. And I created, like rings of positions where the enemy troops could be placed. And so this was how the initial map got made. Then we made the list of all the big events that happened during the siege. We started, thinking, okay, these are the important ones. We definitely need to put these in. Okay, how do we put these other ones? what should we keep, what should we leave out, how many cards should there be in the game, and so on and so forth. So this went on for a few months, and we finally reached something that we were happy with, and we started, showing it to other people, play testing it, and the results were very positive. People liked it a lot. At that time, it was the heaviest game I had worked on. It was quite a challenge for me, but it was definitely worth it because we managed to create something that it did put you in the position of the players of the side that you were representing in the game. You felt when you were playing, you would feel like the people of that side would feel. So initially in the game, you have the Imperial Army, the Ottomans, coming in. They are very, confident that they're going to take the city. They have a vast army. They deploy it like in an arrogant way in front of the city, like saying, "Okay, we're here. Give us the keys to the city." And so the citizens, on the other hand, they were cautious, but they were also very proud. They weren't willing to defend. They weren't willing to surrender. In fact, when they were asked for the keys of the city, the reply was that the keys to our city, we have put them in the barrels of our cannons. Come and get them. So this is a very famous line. And so the siege started, but it was very hard for the attackers, for the Imperial Army to push through, to manage to get in the city. They had this, big wall. From one side, there was the lagoon on the other side, which was very hard to navigate. The waters were very shallow. They didn't know where it was, where everything was. There were a lot of natural obstacles on that side. They couldn't use large ships from that side. So the siege ends up taking a lot longer than they expected, which also made them, a lot very edgy and very uncomfortable. At some point, the Sultan, who sees that nothing is happening with Messolonghi, asks from the Sultan of Egypt to send help, and he sends the Prince Ibrahim Pasha to help. Who he comes with a very big force. He has a huge fleet of ships that managed to surround the city, and so up to that point, the people were confident that they thought that, okay, it's almost over, like the city has won, they're going to leave. But at that point, the allies come, who bring new forces in. They bring better cannon operators. They have artillery, and so things once again become difficult for the Greeks. But once again, the city does not fall, and so all this time you have this roller coaster of emotions. Like you're saying, "Okay, I got this," or "No, it's too hard. No, I can't get through. How am I going to get through?" So, okay, now I have help. Now I'm going to make it. Once again, no, I can't make it. And so both sides feel that while they're playing the game. We managed to put this inside the game, and this is something that I believe is one of the things that make Freedom a great game, because you actually feel like what you would feel if you were there in the real thing.
So this is not only a game, but also a way to tell the story of your country, because as I suppose, this is the first game which is focused on the siege of Missolonghi, or are there any others published in Greece?
Yeah, it is the first game, and even for the Greek War of Independence, there are not a lot of games out there. I mean, mostly some very, very simple games, like for mass market, but nothing like we are used to seeing in war games. So, and that was something that was really bugging me, to be honest, because I said, okay, we have a very rich history. there are a lot of war games about ancient Greece. There are, about the Spartans, the Athens, the Peloponnesian War, all that period. There are a lot of games. Then you have Alexander the Great, successors. There is this period is covered heavily with board games. But when you come to modern history and our Greek War of Independence, there is nothing out there. And there were actually a lot of battles that took place. There was very, very interesting battles took place where you had a lot of unexpected things happen. You had some amazing tactical maneuvers taking place, and nobody knows about them besides Greek people. So freedom was also a chance for me to take a part of this war and show it to other people and say, okay, we're here as well. We also have a rich history, and we can also have a very good game about this period and about these events.
And this is, in my opinion, one of the biggest values of such designs, because when we take a look at Greek history, I see a lot of things that we have in common when it comes to Polish and Greek history. We are both very proud nations who at some point had to fight for our freedom against an opposing force. And I'd say the same applies to Poland, because we have some games concerning Polish history, but most of them are focused on events which are very well known, such as, for instance, case-wide, so the Second World War, or some battles fought maybe during the Polish-Soviet War. But there are over events which are totally absent from wargaming. So I think that applies to both our nations, to both our countries. There are a lot of very interesting topics which just wait to be discovered, to be used as subjects for games. Very interesting games. So I personally,
one comment about this, what you are saying, is that I happened to run across a Polish game that it transferred into a board game, a small part of the history, and I really loved what the game did and how it used, the game setting to inform people about the history. The game, Little Insurgents, the English title.
Yes.
So
exactly.
Yeah, I won't try to say the Polish name because I'm going to kill it. Sorry, but I really loved that game, and because it was very informative of a small part of the history of what took place during the World War II. And I found it fascinating that I could learn about these events through the cards, through the actual gameplay, and it was very, very interesting. I really loved it, and this is something that I think the board games have the ability to do. They can not only give you knowledge about an event, you don't only learn about it, but you get to live it, you get to experience it while you play, and this sticks with you more than just reading a book or an article about it.
That's absolutely true. And although I'm not a board game designer, I play a lot of games, I review a lot of games, and when looking at board games, and especially at war games, I'm always taking a closer look at the educational aspect. Does such a game really give you an insight of the conflict that it simulates? Does it help to learn something interesting about a part of our history? And I personally, when preparing for this interview, I read some articles about the Greek War of Independence, and I read some articles about it some time ago, but I absolutely it's not a topic which I know very well. So this was also an impulse for me to search for some additional information, and that's an additional value of such titles and of such designs. It gives you an additional impulse to look for some information, to discover some fascinating stories, such as the siege of Messolonghi, which was the third siege which happened during the war.
There were a lot of sieges that took place. This was definitely the most important one, and in fact, it was the third siege of that city.
Yes, exactly. That's what I said. Yes, the third one. Yes.
Yes.
So the third one.
I heard first. That's why sorry.
No. I said the third one. Yeah. So the third, and as you said, probably the most famous, because it was maybe the turning point of the entire war.
Yes, it played a huge part, because in the end, so what happened was that the siege started on April of 1825, and it ended April 1826. It lasted a whole year, and near the end, the people were starving, literally starving. I mean, they couldn't eat, they didn't have anything to eat. They had eaten even the animals within the city. They had eaten them, even seaweed. They had eaten it, and they couldn't take it any longer. Still, they weren't willing to surrender. This was even though we use the word morale in the game to signify, who can take it anymore. In actual terms, their morale was very high. They weren't willing to surrender, no matter what. They were adamant on it. And so when they couldn't take it anymore, they decided to do a sortie, to leave the city. And they made these plans that on the 8th of April, during the night, everybody in the city, I think there were like 3,000 fighters and 7,000 civilians, everything but the elderly and the sick. They would leave out during the night, and they would break through the enemy lines to reach the nearby mountain. Unfortunately, some part of this plan was betrayed. So the Imperials, the Ottomans, were actually expecting them. Now, the people within the city, they postponed it for a few days, and they were thinking that, okay, not everything from our plan has been leaked. They don't know everything, and they didn't have any other option left, because literally they couldn't take it anymore. People were falling dead on the streets from hunger. So they decided to do it, and the date was actually 10th of April. So it was the anniversary is this month of the event. So they decided to leave. They do this big sortie, but on one hand, the Imperials were expecting them, the Ottomans, and that night it also happened to have a full moon, so they wanted to live into the night and so be sort of hidden, use the cover of the night to their advantage. They couldn't do that because there was a full moon. So what ended up happening was a massacre. I mean, chaos in short. As soon as they started getting out of the city, the Ottomans started attacking them, and at some point, somebody, probably a traitor, but it's not being documented who exactly was, shouted like, "Go back, go back!" So you have this huge crowd going towards the mountain, and then half of them are starting to turn backwards towards the city. And as you can imagine, it was total chaos. A lot of people, were stepped on. The Ottomans, who all this time they couldn't break through the wall, saw their opening, and they unleashed all of their fury there. And so it was literally a massacre. I mean, out of those 7,000 civilians, only a handful managed to reach the mountain. From the warriors, the fighters, about less than half of those that started managed to break through the lines and reach the mountain and get to safety. And the city was totally, obliterated, like everything. It went down in flames. Actually, the people within the city, the sick and the elderly, that remained within the city uh, barricaded themselves. So they kept fighting for a couple of days, and when they were out of ammo, they actually blew themselves up. So they attracted a lot of Ottoman soldiers, and then they blew themselves up to take as many as they could with them.
Mhm.
So yeah, it was. And out of the civilians that did survive, most of them were captured, and they ended up being sold as slaves
Mhm.
back in Africa. They took them back in Africa, and they were sold into slavery. So the end was very bad, you could say, for the Greek side. However, the bravery that the people showed and the cruelty that followed when the city was taken was what pushed the whole Europe to take action. It
Mhm.
sent shockwaves all over the world, and it ended up being the catalyst for the grand powers to intervene. So you had France, Russia, and England decide to take part in this war, and so they joined. They helped Greece, and a few years
Mhm.
afterwards, you have a very big battle, a sea battle at Navarino, which was
Mhm.
devastating for the Ottomans. And essentially, that battle was what led to the end of the war and Greece
Mhm.
gaining its independence. So, as you see, even though the Greek side lost in that siege, it turned out to be the turning point for the whole war.
Mhm. So an extremely important and an extremely interesting battle. Um, Missolonghi was a siege, and siege games are sometimes designed in such a way that we have a distinctive attacking side and a defensive side. And sometimes in siege games, playing the defensive side is quite boring, is quite repetitive, because all you do is just you react to your opponent's actions. So how freedom is different compared to such designs?
So, what freedom does is that it doesn't focus just on the battle in front of the walls.
Mm-hmm.
It takes you also on what happened around the city of Messolonghi. So you have a map with the surrounding areas, and those areas actually played a huge part during this siege, because whoever controlled them would get a lot of help. Like they would get allies that would go inside the city and fight. They were getting supplies through
Mm-hmm.
those areas. So controlling those areas uh, while we were in the period when we were studying about the game and thinking how should we implement things, it was obvious that these areas played a huge part. So we needed to take this into consideration. So part of the game is the control of the areas surrounding the city of Messolonghi, and whoever controls each area gets a lot of bonuses, which are very important. Like your supply of food depends on having control on those areas. For the Greek side, having new troops is uh, which is also important because the number of people within the city is limited. As
Mm-hmm.
people as they're dying, you're left with fewer and fewer, defenders. So having control of some areas was very crucial so that you can get a steady supply of new warriors. And suddenly you have all these things to take into consideration. So uh, if the Ottoman army decides not to attack and says, "Okay, I'll stay back and wait for things to uh, proceed," it's actually to their disadvantage because you're saying, "Okay, so you're not attacking me. I don't have anything to do in front of the walls. I'll start spending my actions and investing on getting control of the whole area around the map, which in the long run is definitely going to help me win this thing." So
Mm-hmm.
in the end, the Ottoman player is left with no option. He has to attack, and he also has to approach uh, the problem that he's facing, which is you have this big wall. The odds are very much against you when you try to push through, but you have to continue doing. You have to be sending troops there, because even once in a blue moon, you make a hit. You take someone with you. Okay, we have vast numbers. They are way outnumbered. So even a single unit, when it goes down, it's a victory for the attackers. So
Mm-hmm.
you have to keep pushing through. You're also trying to build cannons to take down these walls, so that you have a way to step up and get inside, to get on top of the wall. And you should also try to approach the city from another angle, going from the sea. So
Mm-hmm.
usually when you have a castle and you have people trying to get through, usually there's only one way to do it: break the gate, break the wall, climb it, find a way to do that. So here they had the option of going through the lagoon, but as I said before, that was also a very difficult task. And however, you do have that option, and sometimes the best way to proceed is to try to approach it from both sides. Send people
Mm-hmm.
on the front of the walls, send also people from the lagoon. If you manage to push through, suddenly you put a lot of pressure on the Greek side. So basically, you have a lot of ways to approach the whole operation. So you have the in front of the wall, you have the back of the city, the lagoon, you have the whole surrounding map with everything that's taking place, and you also need to uh, consider your resources. And one of the things that I really loved was that the Greek side, they were cornered. They had the besiegers, and they kept asking for help from what was the government at that point in
Mm-hmm.
of of the regions that had been liberated. There was a government, and they kept asking for help. However, they were heavily ignored. They thought that, okay, you got this. You don't need our help. There are a lot of other battles going on. There are other areas we need to liberate. So the government would not send any help. The people
Mm-hmm.
in Messolonghi kept asking and kept asking. So this was turned into a mechanic during the game. So you have the option of asking for help, and the Greek side does it every round. But the odds are very bad in the beginning, and gradually, the more that you do it, the more that you ask, they become a little bit better, and at some point, if you achieve to, if you are successful in your plea for help, you get a boost, which can be very helpful. It can even turn the tide. On the
Mm-hmm.
other side, on the other part, the Ottoman side, initially they can ask for money from the Sultan, from the High Porte. Uh, so they ask for money, and in the beginning, there's no problem. Here, take the money, whatever
Mm-hmm.
you ask. But as this happens more and more, the Sultan becomes, wary. Says, okay, you keep asking for money, but I'm not seeing results. So
Mm-hmm.
you have something that is similar yet the opposite. So initially,
Mm-hmm.
it's very easy to ask for help, but as the game progresses, it becomes harder and harder. So these were also put into the game, and they create a very interesting dynamic, because they give you one more thing to pay attention to look for. It can be very important when this help comes. So you have all these things that you need to take into consideration. Obviously, with games like this, you don't have enough actions. Uh, you cannot do everything that you want to do, and this is where the fun in the game is. Like, there are a million things that you want to do, and you need to focus on what's the most important thing right now. Where should I focus? Should I focus here, or send those troops away? Should I focus on the map, the bigger region? What should I do? What's my plan?
Mm-hmm. The game is not a very long game because it takes somewhere around 90 to 120 minutes to finish a whole game. And it is divided into 6 turns. Yes, the siege lasted for 12 months, so I suppose that one turn is 2 months approximately. And
Exactly. Yeah.
what are the victory conditions of both sides? Because you mentioned morale earlier. This is a very important factor for both sides.
Yeah.
So how exactly both sides can win?
Okay. So for the Imperial Army, uh, one way to win is if you manage to get your troops on top of the walls,
Mm-hmm.
but not just on top of the wall. You need to get control of one of the forts there. So there are four important forts on top of the wall, and if you have a unit there at the end of a round, you get to win.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the reason that it was placed at the end of the round was because in reality, the Ottomans at some point managed to go on top of the wall, but they were driven away. They didn't last. They lasted there for about 2 days. They realized that there was a second wall built behind the first one, so they couldn't push through. And so even though there was an Ottoman flag for a couple of days on top of the wall, they didn't win at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So that was also used in the game. You have to be on top of the wall at the end of a round to win. Similarly, if you manage to go through the lagoon and have a unit on the beach, so if you manage to get inside the city but from the seaside, you also get to win. On the other side, the Greeks need to last for those 6 rounds. If they last for 6 rounds, they get to win. Why? Because the Ottoman army would also leave at that point. When the city fell, as I described before, they asked Ibrahim Pasha how long would they have stayed if the citizens had not left, and he said that he pointed to a mountain and said if the snows over there had melted, we would have left. So that was
Mm-hmm.
it was April, so it was like in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very close, as I said, for both sides. So if the Greek side managed to survive for 6 rounds, they get to win. There is a second win condition for both sides, which is the morale. So if the morale of any of the two sides drops to zero, the other side automatically wins. And in the game, there are a lot of ways to manipulate morale. So whenever there is a battle, whenever you have fighting, and you manage to wipe out all the units in one region, in one space, you can either increase your morale or lower your opponents. So there is a lot of back and forth going on with the morale of the two sides. Also, at the end of every round, you have to feed your units. Both the people inside the city, they had to feed their population, but also the army on the outside. It was a mercenary army in its mostly, and so they had to be fed and they had to be paid. So this is another thing that the player playing the Imperials has to take into account. That okay, I need to make sure that I have food, and I need to make sure that I have money for these people. Otherwise, they start leaving, and my morale also drops because they are saying, okay, what do we do here? Why do we fight? Nothing happens. We can't get the city. So it's quite possible for both sides to have their morale drop to zero, and if that happens, the other side wins.
So a lot of things that you have to take into consideration. And also a lot of strategies, as I see, because you can take different approaches playing as the Ottomans, but also focus on different sides playing as the Greeks, yes?
Yeah.
So quite an interesting thing. One more question concerning freedom. Is this game also solitaire suitable? Because information concerning a solo mode in the Kickstarter campaign. Is it real? Is it available? Is it possible to be played solo?
Yes, we actually created a solo mode, and that was one of the biggest requests during the Kickstarter campaign. So, well, initially it was in the back of my mind to do something for a solo game. During the campaign, it was obvious that I needed to focus on that, and so I put these ideas to the test. And there is a solo design a solo mode that has been designed, which puts you in place of the Ottomans, of the Imperial Army, and there is an AI controlling the Greek side, the insurgents. So, since, as you said before, usually in a siege, the people who are besieged, they usually react to what happens from the attackers. So this was something that could in a solo game it was more suitable to be adjusted like this. So you have the insurgents being played by an AI, and you play as the Ottoman army trying to get inside the city, trying to capture it. And it's actually, from comments I've seen online, it's quite challenging for a lot of people. It's been praised a lot, so it seems that it's working. I was very afraid when I put it out that somebody's going to come up with a loophole or something and say, "Hey, look, here the AI is not playing properly, and if you do this and this and that, you get to win." So far, it hasn't happened, and it's been quite challenging to manage to win. And there are also ways to adjust the difficulty to make it easier or harder for the player to get it.
Okay, so that's always a good news, because many wargamers also like to solo games, and especially in siege games, as you mentioned, when we have siege situations, the defenders very often react to what the attackers do. So those games are in general good games to be played solo. Vangelis, one more question concerning your next projects, because you focused on this very interesting subject concerning the Greek War of Independence. Do you have any other ideas when it comes to historical projects? What are your over board games which you are working on?
So there is one game I'm currently working also for Phalanx, but it's quite different. It's called Suffrage, and it is about women getting the right to vote.
Okay.
So in 2020, it was the 100th anniversary for the 19th Amendment in the US, which gave the women the right to vote. So I'm working on a game around this. Actually, there was a race for suffragists to manage to get the states to vote in favor of the 19th Amendment. So the game is around that, but it's much simpler than Freedom. This is not a war game. This, as you said, games like this should be tools. Should also be able to be used as tools to educate people. So we're looking at a simpler rule set in that one. So this is one of the titles that I'm working on right now. And there, in a few months, there is also a Kickstarter coming out of another game that I've been working on called Hegemony, which is a game that puts the players in the roles of different classes within our society. So you have the capitalist class, you have the working class, the middle class, and the state itself. And this is a politico-economic game, also card-driven, but also asymmetric. Each class plays completely different, has different goals, and they try to pursue their agenda by, changing the policies. If there is voting phases and you have elections during the game, you try to change policies to your advantage. You try to manage your economy, and so it's also quite challenging, and it's also very helpful to show you how our society actually works. How things affect each other, how connected, let's say, that the classes are, and how what one class does affects the others. So it can also be used as an educational, tool, but it's also a very interesting thematic game.
So both games seem very interesting, and again, those are subjects totally out of the box. So congratulations for finding such interesting topics. I will be looking forward to your Kickstarter campaign. I will be keeping my fingers crossed. I hope both games will be big successes.
Thank you.
So, Vangelis, thank you a lot for this interview, that you agreed to answer a few of my questions, for explaining also how the evolution of the design process of Freedom looked like. I will also be keeping my fingers crossed for the Polish version of this game, because this game is currently on pre-order on the Phalanx page. There are still some orders which are required in order to publish this game, but I suppose that it will happen in some time, and more people will be able to enjoy this game and to learn more about Greek history, which is a very rich history, and I think it deserves to be much well known than today.
Thank you.
So once more, thank you for the interview. Thank you also for watching this interview and for being with us. I invite you all to take also a look at our other videos that we have on our channel. We have more interviews. We have also some more videos in English, including reviews and unboxings of our titles. This was an interview with Vangelis Bagiartakis, the author of Freedom. Thank you once more. Have a nice day.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
And see you next time.